Marcus from the Burger Bar Boys and Darnell of the Johnson crew were once just neighborhood kids. But their rivalry ignited a violent gang war that tore Birmingham apart. What started as a simple fight for respect exploded into a deadly battle fueled by betrayal, secrets, and revenge. This is the story of how two gangs pushed a city to the brink, and how everything changed in a shocking twist no one saw coming. Birmingham was a city known more for its quiet neighborhoods and hard-working people than for violence or crime. For many years the streets hummed with everyday life. Children playing in parks, shop owners greeting customers, and families going about their routines. The city had its challenges, like any urban area, but nothing prepared anyone for the storm that was about to hit. In this calm, two groups quietly existed, each rooted in different parts of the city and unaware how their fates would soon intertwine in a deadly way. The Burger Bar Boys were a relatively new group, named after the small, popular burger joint where they spent much of their time. It was a place that offered more than just food. It was a hangout, a meeting spot, and a symbol of their identity. The boys who gathered there were mostly young men from working-class backgrounds, searching for respect and belonging in a city that often overlooked them. The Burger Bar Boys weren't initially violent or dangerous. They wanted to carve out a space where they could protect their own and build something of their own making. They started as friends, but over time the group grew, attracting more members who believed in standing up against the difficulties they faced daily. Across town, in the east side of Birmingham, the Johnson crew held sway. This gang was older and more established, with a reputation that spread fear throughout the neighborhood. Unlike the Burger Bar Boys, the Johnson crew's power came from intimidation and control over illegal activities, including drug trafficking and protection rackets. They had a strict hierarchy, and their presence was felt in almost every corner of their territory. The Johnson crew operated like a well-oiled machine. Rules were enforced with violence, and any dissent was crushed quickly. For years these two groups existed separately, each controlling their own parts of Birmingham, without crossing into each other's domain. It was a delicate balance, like two sides of the same coin, coexisting without direct confrontation. But beneath this calm was a simmering tension, a mix of competition and distrust. Both gangs wanted more control, more influence, more respect, and the lines between their territories were thin and easily crossed. What made the situation even more fragile was the city itself. Birmingham was changing, with new developments threatening old neighborhoods and pushing people into tighter spaces. Jobs were scarce and young people struggled to find paths out of poverty. In this environment, the need for power and security became more urgent, and the gangs became more than just groups of friends or criminals. They became symbols of survival. No one could predict exactly when or how the peace would break. But when it did, the shockwaves would be felt across every street and every home. What began as two separate groups with different goals would soon turn into a brutal war that nobody could escape. The quiet before the storm was about to end, and Birmingham would never be the same again. The fragile peace between the Burger Bar Boys and the Johnson crew lasted only until a single event set everything in motion, an act that seemed small at first, but exploded into violence no one could control. It started with a robbery, the kind that happens in the shadows and rarely makes headlines. A member of the Burger Bar Boys, eager to prove himself and hungry for respect, took a chance and stole money from a hidden stash that belonged to the Johnson crew. This wasn't just any theft, it was a direct challenge to the authority of the Johnson crew, a dangerous move in a city already tense with unspoken rivalries. At first the theft went unnoticed, but soon the Johnson crew realized what had happened. Their reaction was swift and brutal. They sent a clear message: no one disrespected them without consequence. The retaliation wasn't just about getting the money back. It was about power and pride. In the gang world, reputation is everything, and the Johnson crew could not afford to appear weak. What followed was a series of violent attacks aimed directly at the Burger Bar Boys. These were no random acts of violence. They were carefully planned strikes meant to intimidate, punish, and warn. Birmingham streets, once calm and familiar, turned dangerous overnight. The Burger Bar Boys, who had once been just a group of friends looking out for each other, suddenly found themselves under siege. Their territory was invaded, their members targeted. The city watched in disbelief as shootings and stabbings became more frequent. The violence spread fast, like wildfire, and it seemed no one was safe from the conflict. Innocent bystanders found themselves caught in the crossfire, and fear gripped entire neighborhoods. Both gangs escalated the violence, each attack fueling the next in a vicious cycle. The Burger Bar Boys refused to back down, feeling the pressure to respond with equal force to defend their name and their people. What began as a robbery turned into something much larger, a full-scale war for dominance. The gangs used everything at their disposal: weapons, allies, and intelligence. They marked territory with graffiti and violence, making it clear which streets belonged to whom. The community struggled to understand how things had spiraled so quickly. What started as a petty crime became a public battle that consumed the city. Police increased patrols, but the gangs were clever, using back alleys and secret meeting spots to avoid capture. Each side believed they were fighting for survival, but the real victims were the residents living amidst the chaos. As the gang war intensified, Birmingham was transformed from a city of quiet streets into a battleground. The robbery that ignited the conflict would be remembered as the spark that set off one of the most brutal and tragic chapters in the city's history. The violence was only just beginning. As the conflict between the Burger Bar Boys and the Johnson crew grew, Birmingham streets became divided, marked by fear and hostility. What had started as a robbery and a quick retaliation now morphed into an all-out war, with clear lines drawn between the two gangs and their territories. Neighborhoods that once felt safe became battlegrounds, where violence was a constant threat, and every corner carried the risk of danger. The city was split in two, with each gang fiercely guarding its domain. The Burger Bar Boys fought not only for survival but for respect. They were no longer just a group of young men hanging out near a burger joint. They had become a symbol of resistance for many in their community. Their fight was about more than territory. It was about proving they could stand up to the Johnson crew, who had long held power through fear and control. The boys wanted to show they were just as strong, just as determined. Their territory, once a quiet neighborhood, was now plastered with their graffiti, a declaration of presence and defiance. On the other side, the Johnson crew was determined to maintain and expand their control. They were well organized and ruthless, using intimidation and violence to keep their grip on the east side. Their members operated with a cold efficiency, targeting anyone who opposed them or threatened their interests. They weren't just fighting for land, they were fighting for dominance over Birmingham's underworld. Their control of illegal businesses brought money and power, and they were willing to risk everything to keep it. Civilians were caught in the middle of this deadly struggle. Many were terrified, trying to avoid the gang members and the violence that followed them. Parents kept children indoors, businesses boarded up windows, and streets once filled with life grew silent after dark. The presence of the gangs affected every aspect of daily life. People no longer walked freely. The fear of a stray bullet or a sudden attack kept them on edge. The community was fractured, divided between those who supported one gang or the other, and those who just wanted the violence to stop. Both gangs became bolder, pushing boundaries and challenging each other in open confrontations. Shootings, assaults, and even bombings took place, leaving destruction in their wake. The police were overwhelmed and struggled to control the chaos. Their efforts to mediate or arrest key players often failed, as the gangs operated in the shadows and had networks of supporters. The war was no longer just about power or money. It was a fight for survival and respect, and both sides were willing to do whatever it took. The cycle of violence seemed endless, with each attack answered by an even deadlier response. Birmingham streets had become a war zone, and the city held its breath, waiting to see who would come out on top, or if the violence would destroy them all. As the gang war between the Burger Bar Boys and the Johnson crew intensified, a dangerous new element began to surface: betrayal from within. Trust, already fragile in such a violent world, started to crumble as rumors spread that someone inside the Burger Bar Boys was secretly feeding information to the Johnson crew. This kind of betrayal was a game changer. It wasn't just about guns or territory anymore. It was about the invisible enemy lurking in the shadows, undermining the gang from within. The Burger Bar Boys had built their strength on loyalty and brotherhood. Every member knew that their survival depended on sticking together, especially with enemies closing in on all sides. But whispers of a traitor grew louder, sparking paranoia that infected even the closest friendships. Members who once fought side by side now eyed each other with suspicion, unsure who could be trusted. Meetings became tense and guarded, every conversation watched closely. The fear that any word could be a trap made the gang vulnerable in a way bullets never could. Meanwhile, the Johnson crew took full advantage of the internal chaos. With access to inside information, they could anticipate the Burger Bar Boys' moves, avoiding traps, planning ambushes, and striking at moments of weakness. This intelligence gave the Johnson crew a deadly edge in the war, turning battles into one-sided attacks that left the Burger Bar Boys reeling. What had once been a fierce but balanced fight began to tilt dangerously in favor of the Johnson crew. The identity of the traitor remained a closely guarded secret for a long time. No one outside the gangs knew who had betrayed the Burger Bar Boys, and inside, accusations flew wildly, deepening the fractures within the group. Some suspected it was a new recruit trying to save himself, while others thought a trusted leader might have switched sides. This uncertainty tore at the gang's unity and morale, making every victory feel hollow and every loss devastating. The betrayal also affected the community. Residents who had hoped for peace watched helplessly as violence escalated, and the gang's grip tightened. Trust between neighbors weakened. As fear spread, no one knew who might be spying or reporting to the gangs. The betrayal wasn't just a problem for the Burger Bar Boys, it rippled through the city, feeding the cycle of fear and violence. As the war dragged on, it became clear that this hidden enemy was one of the most dangerous threats the Burger Bar Boys faced. The betrayal showed that the war wasn't just fought on the streets, it was also a battle of secrets and deception. With every secret revealed, the stakes grew higher, and the question on everyone's mind was simple but chilling. Who could be trusted when trust was a weapon? Tensions between the Burger Bar Boys and the Johnson crew reached a breaking point when both sides agreed to a rare and tense attempt at peace. The violence had spiraled out of control, and the community was desperate for a moment of calm. Leaders from both gangs arranged a meeting, hoping to negotiate a truce that could end the bloodshed. It was an opportunity for a fresh start, a chance to stop the cycle of retaliation and destruction. But what should have been a turning point instead became the deadliest night in Birmingham's recent history. The meeting took place in a secluded spot, away from the eyes of the city. Both gangs arrived cautiously, each unsure if the other was sincere. Despite the fear and suspicion, there was a shared hope that maybe, just maybe, this could be the end of the war. The leaders spoke in hushed tones, laying out terms and trying to find common ground. But beneath the surface, the Johnson crew had already planned a betrayal. Without warning, the peaceful negotiations exploded into violence. The Johnson crew launched a brutal ambush, catching the Burger Bar Boys completely off guard. Gunfire rang out, echoing through the streets and shattering the fragile hopes of peace. Several key members of the Burger Bar Boys were killed or seriously injured in the attack. The ambush was not just a surprise attack. It was a calculated strike designed to destroy the leadership and cripple the gang's ability to fight back. The aftermath of the ambush sent shockwaves through Birmingham. The city's residents, already worn down by months of gang violence, were horrified by the betrayal and the bloodshed. The Burger Bar Boys were devastated, losing leaders who had kept the group together and inspired their fight. But instead of breaking the gang's spirit, the attack hardened their resolve. The surviving members vowed revenge, their anger fueling an even fiercer determination to fight the Johnson crew. This moment marked a turning point in the war. The ambush destroyed any hope of peace and turned the conflict into a ruthless battle, where neither side showed mercy. Violence escalated quickly after that night. with attacks becoming more frequent and more deadly. Both gangs recruited new members, desperate to strengthen their forces for the brutal war ahead. The city watched, helplessly, as Birmingham streets became a battleground, the scars of the ambush visible in every corner. What was supposed to be a chance for peace had become the moment that pushed the city deeper into chaos. The brutal war between the Burger Bar Boys and the Johnson crew was far from over. It was about to enter its darkest chapter yet. As the gang war raged on, the people of Birmingham found themselves caught in the middle of a conflict they never wanted. The violence wasn't just a problem for the gangs, it affected every corner of the city. Families lived in constant fear, businesses struggled to stay open, and schools became places where safety was no longer guaranteed. The community was breaking under the weight of the ongoing battle between the Burger Bar Boys and the Johnson crew. Frustrated and desperate, residents began to take matters into their own hands. Neighborhood watch groups formed, volunteers patrolled the streets, and local leaders organized meetings to discuss how to stop the violence. These efforts weren't always welcomed by the gangs, who saw community resistance as a threat to their control. Still, ordinary citizens refused to be silent any longer. They wanted peace, and they wanted their neighborhoods back. The city's businesses suffered deeply. Shops and restaurants, once thriving places where neighbors gathered, closed down or operated with heavy security. Many owners feared for their safety and the safety of their customers. The economy in some areas slowed as people stayed indoors, unwilling to risk encountering gang violence on the streets. This economic downturn added another layer of hardship to already struggling neighborhoods. Despite the fear and uncertainty, some civilians secretly helped one gang or the other. Whether out of loyalty, protection, or fear, these alliances complicated the situation further. People passed messages, provided shelter, or turned a blind eye to illegal activities. This made it harder for law enforcement to get a clear picture of what was happening and who was involved. The line between victim and participant blurred, creating a complicated web of relationships that fueled the conflict. The police worked hard to respond to the violence, increasing patrols and launching investigations, but their efforts were often too little, too late. The gangs operated in the shadows, using secret meeting spots and coded language to avoid detection. Many members were skilled at evading capture, and the constant fear of informants made it difficult for law enforcement to gather reliable information. The city's leaders called for help from outside agencies, trying to bring in resources to stop the bloodshed. But the gang war was deeply rooted in the city's social and economic problems: poverty, lack of opportunity, and broken families. It wasn't just a matter of arrests, it was a complex challenge that needed long-term solutions. As the violence continued, the community's spirit was tested. People held on to hope for a future without fear, but with each passing day, the war seemed more unstoppable. Birmingham's residents learned the hard way that peace would not come easily, and that the cost of war was more than just lives lost. It was the breaking of a city's heart. Just when it seemed the war between the Burger Bar Boys and the Johnson crew was locked in a deadly stalemate, a new and unexpected force entered the battle. A shadowy underground drug operation, controlled by a mysterious figure no one had seen before. This new player changed everything. Neither gang had anticipated this hidden power, and their struggle for control suddenly became far more complicated and dangerous. The underground drug network was organized and ruthless. It operated in the dark corners of Birmingham, moving illegal substances through circuit channels with a level of precision and secrecy that surprised even the seasoned gang members. This operation was not tied to either the Burger Bar Boys or the Johnson crew at first, but its influence quickly spread as both gangs realized controlling this network meant a huge increase in money and power. The new player behind the drug trade was careful to stay out of the spotlight. They pulled strings from behind the inns, building a network of loyal dealers and enforcers who answered only to them. The drug operation wasn't just about profits, it was about gaining leverage over both gangs. Whoever controlled the drugs controlled the streets, and that control could decide the outcome of the war. Both the Burger Bar Boys and the Johnson crew scrambled to take control of the drug network. Battles erupted over supply routes, meeting spots, and drug labs hidden in abandoned buildings and quiet neighborhoods. The violence became even deadlier, with betrayals and double crosses more frequent as the gangs fought to gain the upper hand. Alliances were formed and broken quickly, and old enemies found themselves working together if it meant gaining even a small advantage. This underground operation also brought new weapons and resources to the war. The money flowing from drug sales funded better guns, more fighters, and even bribed some officials. The gangs became more dangerous than ever, and the city's police forces struggled to keep up. The drug trade added a new layer of complexity that law enforcement wasn't prepared for. The community felt the impact immediately. Areas once peaceful now saw increased drug addiction and crime rates. Families were torn by the new dangers, and the already fragile social fabric began to unravel further. The war was no longer just between two gangs. It was a battle for control of an illegal empire that affected everyone in Birmingham. This secret weapon in the gang war pushed the conflict into uncharted territory. The stakes were higher, the risks greater, and the violence more unpredictable. What had once been a fight for respect and survival now became a ruthless struggle for ultimate power. Birmingham's brutal gang war was entering a new, darker phase. Just when it seemed the Burger Bar Boys might finally gain the upper hand in the brutal gang war, a shocking revelation turned everything upside down. The gang's leader, a man who had been seen as a symbol of strength and loyalty, was exposed as a traitor working secretly with the Johnson crew. This betrayal wasn't a small act of disloyalty. It was a calculated move that had allowed the Johnson crew to stay one step ahead throughout the entire conflict. For months, the leader had been feeding information to the enemy, passing along plans, locations, and strategies. His reason was deeply personal. He was protecting his family, caught between the violence of the gangs and the fear of losing those he cared about. While his betrayal devastated the Burger Bar Boys, it also showed how complex the war had become. It wasn't just a simple battle between two gangs. It was filled with hidden motives, secret deals, and impossible choices. The exposure of the leader's double life sent shockwaves through the Burger Bar Boys. Members felt anger, confusion, and betrayal all at once. Their trust, already fragile from the earlier rumors of spies within the gang, shattered completely. The group's unity fell apart, with some members leaving or turning against each other. Without strong leadership, the Burger Bar Boys struggled to regroup and plan their next moves. Their enemies exploited this weakness, pressing harder to crush the once formidable gang. The Johnson crew, meanwhile, gained a dangerous advantage. With their inside man, they had been able to avoid ambushes, plan attacks, and undermine the Burger Bar Boys from within. But the betrayal also exposed the darker side of gang life. How fear and loyalty could be twisted into weapons. The Johnson crew used the information to tighten their grip on the city, expanding their influence and controlling more territory than ever before. The community watched in stunned silence as the war spiraled deeper into chaos. The leader's betrayal became a symbol of the war's tragic cost, not just in lives lost, but in broken trust and shattered family. People who had hoped for peace realized the conflict was far more complicated and personal than anyone had imagined. This twist changed the course of the gang war. It revealed that the battle was not only fought with guns and violence, but also with secrets and deception. As the Burger Bar Boys tried to recover from this blow, the war pushed forward into its darkest and most uncertain chapter yet. Birmingham's streets were no longer just battlegrounds. They were tangled webs of loyalty and betrayal where no one was truly safe. As the Burger Bar Boys reeled from the betrayal of their leader, a new and unexpected alliance began to form. One that neither the Johnson crew nor the rest of Birmingham saw coming. A group of young community activists, tired of the violence tearing their neighborhoods apart, started reaching out to members of both gangs. Their message was simple but powerful. The war had to end. This unexpected peace movement created a spark of hope in a city consumed by chaos. The activists weren't politicians or law enforcement. They were ordinary people who had grown up around the violence and knew the pain it caused firsthand. They organized community meetings, cleanup projects and outreach programs aimed at giving young people alternatives to gang life. Slowly, some members of the Burger Bar Boys and even a few from the Johnson crew began listening. They were tired of the endless fighting and losses, and the idea of change, however risky, began to feel worth considering. These efforts didn't go unnoticed by the gang's leaders. Some saw the movement as a threat to their power, fearing loss of control and profits from the drug trade. Others, worn down by years of fighting and loss, quietly supported the idea of peace. This divide created new tensions within the gangs, sparking arguments over whether to continue the war or try to find a way out. The activists worked hard to bridge the gap between the two sides. They held secret meetings where representatives from both gangs could speak without fear of violence or judgment. These talks were fragile and filled with suspicion, but they marked the first real steps toward peace. The activists pushed for agreements to stop certain types of violence and reduce attacks on innocent civilians. While the truce was far from perfect, it began to slow the fighting in some neighborhoods. Schools reopened with less fear. Businesses saw more customers, and families started to breathe a little easier. The city began to imagine a future beyond the war, but the road ahead was still dangerous. Not everyone wanted peace, and the warlords who thrived on violence weren't ready to give up their grip. The unexpected alliance showed Birmingham that change was possible, even in the darkest times. It revealed the strength of a community united against destruction and the power of hope to challenge fear. The gang war wasn't over, but the seeds of peace had been planted, offering a chance for Birmingham to heal and rebuild after years of brutal conflict. The fragile truce, sparked by community activists, marked the beginning of the end for Birmingham's brutal gang war. But peace did not come quickly or easily. Both the Burger Bar Boys and the Johnson crew had endured years of violence, betrayal, and loss, and letting go of the fight meant facing deep fears and old grudges. The city was scarred, and healing would take time. Yet for the first time in years there was a genuine hope that the nightmare might finally be over. The activists continued to play a vital role, pushing for dialogue and understanding between the gangs and working to rebuild trust in neighborhoods shattered by conflict. Their efforts brought community leaders, local officials, and even law enforcement to the table, creating a broader movement dedicated to peace. Programs aimed at youth empowerment, job training, and education offered alternatives to gang life, helping to break the cycle of violence that had gripped Birmingham for so long. Some gang members chose to walk away from the violence, joining these programs and seeking new paths. It was a difficult decision, one that meant leaving behind friends, facing threats, and confronting a lifetime of fear and trauma. But these brave individuals became symbols of change, inspiring others to believe that life beyond the war was possible. Despite the progress, not all battles were over. Small pockets of violence flared up sporadically as old tensions lingered and some resisted the new peace. The gangs still controlled parts of the city, and the drug trade continued to tempt those desperate for quick money. But the majority of the community refused to let the past define their future. They stood firm, determined to protect the fragile peace they had fought so hard to build. The city began to change. Streets once ruled by fear slowly filled with life again. Children played, businesses reopened, and neighbors reconnected. Birmingham's residents took pride in their resilience, showing the world that even in the darkest times, hope could survive. The gang war that had once seemed unstoppable was now a painful memory, a harsh lesson about the cost of violence.